Well, good morning. How many of you were not here last week? Yeah, I just want to give you all a chance to participate right as we kind of get going here. But today's the last day of this message series for this brand new year, and I've had one goal for this whole series, and I have one goal for today, and it's simply this: to encourage you not to give up, to remind you that there is hope, that your story is not over yet, even though the relationship doesn't seem like it's working, or it hasn't. Even though that debt is mind-boggling, and it doesn't seem like you're making any way with it. Even though school is too hard, or too boring, or there's too much of it left to do till you get to where you really want to be. Even though you may be doing something that you didn't go to school for, even though you think you would have been farther along or in a different place at this moment in life. To encourage us that as bleak as things may be, all the even those we have, and even though if you own a blue Nissan Xterra and have your hazards lights on right now and want to be able to leave later after we get done, even though that there's hope. And the challenge with all of us, especially as we've talked here over the last few weeks about New Year's and the resolutions we make and the things we're trying to want to change, the things we want to be better at, the things this is the year we're going to get this underneath control, and so often we go about that by doing the same things we've always done, which if you don't know, if you do the same things you've always done, you're going to get what you've always gotten. You got to kind of break out of that pattern. But even though we kind of just want to do something and get past it, there's an idea I want to put out as we begin today, and it's simply this. And that's important to know. Because so often what has taken us years to develop, years to gather around us, years to earn or to build up or to establish in our lives. If it's going to be a significant change, it doesn't happen overnight. And it's an ongoing process. And sometimes we need to recognize that what we're battling in our life, what we're dealing with in life, is not going to be fixed overnight. And even though it may not be fixed overnight, it is no less a miracle than something that could have been fixed overnight or might have been fixed overnight. But it's an ongoing process. But it does start with a single choice, a single decision, a single, all right, it's time. And maybe today is that day for you to make that decision, to make that choice. Say, maybe, all right, it's time. Because today I want to talk to you about the idea of having hope in spite of, even though all those kinds of things. And if you're not a kind of follower of Jesus today, if you stumbled in here because the snow was really bad where you're at and you were just looking for a warm place to stay today, or maybe you came with somebody because you got invited, maybe you came for the meal earlier and you got sucked in the crowd as they came into here, whatever you're thinking, maybe you're at the start of this year trying to give God one more chance, or maybe yourself one more chance. But sometimes it's just a choice, a decision, as Timothy prayed for us and with us here a little bit ago, to allowing God to unlock that thing in their lives. One of the great blessings of being a pastor, I've always told people the best thing about what I do for a living and the worst thing are the exact same thing. And you know what it is? It's you. It's people. Because you can see some incredible things take place in people's lives. And the flip side is that sometimes people, will come and talk to you about problems they have in their lives and the struggles they're having with them. And as you listen to the problems, you think, you don't really need a solution to that problem. What you need is a new direction. But you're focused that this is just a problem. And I could tell you lots of stories. One of the ones that sticks out of my mind the most is this idea of significant change that doesn't happen overnight. is a lady who I'm going to call Ann because, well, that's her name. Her name's Ann, all right? I've known Ann for about almost 10 years now, and she was a member of a church I pastored before coming here. And when I first met Ann, she had the very first thing she did, the first night I stopped by, they were having some practice at church, and I thought I'd come by and introduce myself. And she came up with this other lady, and she introduced the other lady as her life partner to see if that kind of threw me off my game there, and I didn't. But Ann was a large lady, large in personality and large in stature. She was almost my height, and she was a lot broader than me. And Ann just had this presence that you knew that if she got mad, you were in trouble. Anybody know somebody like that? You just kind of go, I just don't want it, And guys are, don't like to have any woman mad at them, but you especially don't want to have a large lady mad at you because you don't know what to do then, right? So the smaller one, you think you can kind of overpower them, but when it gets there's this kind of a thing. And as I had a chance to get to know Ann and talk with her, and I discovered she had a really rough life. She had a really hard start and a really dysfunctional family. As I recall the story, I think she left home like at 15 years old because it just had gotten unbearable at home. Unbearable in lots of ways I don't want to bring up because we're a family program today, all right? She'd gone to live out her life on the age of 15 out in the streets, and to survive, she did what she had to survive. She got into drugs and alcohol, and that became the biggest portion of her life for a long time until finally something happened. A decision, saw an opportunity, and she kind of turned that corner and began to open her life up to God and what he was doing, and this process began. And when I first met her, Ann was still a lady that could, if she wanted to, could get mad and really take care of a situation. And so we would have discussions every once in a while. She'd call me up and say, "Hey, Pastor, can I come by and talk to you?" And I did what every good pastor says. "Does this have anything to do with me?" And when she said, "No, I just got to talk to you about something in life," Jose, right? You say, "Okay, yeah, come on by," because you want to be prepared. If it's got to do with you, you got to know what I do wrong. But so she'd come by and she'd kind of tell me what was going on in her life and look for some help and advice. And that's always great when you're not part of the problem. You always got great advice and help. And so we'd have these conversations off and on. And one of the last conversations I remember having with her before I moved out here was she'd called me up and said, "Hey, Mike, can I come by and see you?" And I said, "Sure." Because I knew by then it had nothing to do with me. It's always with her. So that's always a good meeting for me as a pastor. And she came by and she sat down and she said, "I have a problem." And I said, What's your problem, man?" And she said, "I can't get mad." To which I said, "Better explain that to me. What do you mean you can't get mad?" Because I'd been around her long enough and not been the focal point of her anger at times, but had witnessed the effect of her anger. And she told me a situation she was going through that normally would send most of us kind of get angry about. And she said, "I can't get mad. And I don't know what to do. Because my whole life, that's how I protect myself." And she said, "I know I'm a big person, and when I get mad, people listen, people back up. It's my way of dealing with stuff." And she says, "I don't know what to do. Because here's what's happened to me, and I can't get mad at them." And I told Ann that day what I told her almost every time I had a discussion with her. God has been doing something in your life. And while you may not notice it all the time, it's moments like this that you see something has happened. Something has changed in your life. See, when you allow God to enter in, that is, access your heart, something happens. And the problem for a lot of us in this room, and a lot of us watching online, and a lot of us just in life in general is we don't see the things happening because we are way too close to the situation. How many of you ever had somebody say to you, something positive about you that you are kind of at the moment clueless about? Oh, well, God, you raised your hand a second there. I was going to say, you guys got to get some better friends because it wasn't a great response. But, you're kind of surprised. Really? I didn't think about it. But you begin to think and listen to their stories and you say, well, yeah, but because you're living your life all the time and you want to be here, and it seems like here is always never gets any closer, it just keeps going even though you feel like you're moving. But significant change doesn't happen overnight. It's an ongoing process. And the thing that when we understand clearly what God is about, we recognize that that's a good thing. Because God is all about the process, not about having a finished product today or tomorrow or even next year. Even though we wish we could get the finished product now. So before we jump into the major text we're going to look at today, I'm going to invite you just to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, okay? Father, we've already talked to you. We've talked to you through words we've sung. We've talked to you when Timothy prayed for and with us. We may have talked to you this morning as we got out of bed or as we ate breakfast. It may have been a while since we've talked to you. But I am thankful that any time we open our mouth or think our thoughts or give you a little space in our life, that you listen to us like we're the only person in the world. And so today, I just pray that you would be that for each one of us today. Because all of us have our stuff. And all of us have our things that we wish we could change and change immediately. All of us believe that if we could get these things fixed, everything would be perfect. But I just ask you today to remind us again that it's in and through the process that the things we need most can take place. And so just speak to us now through these words that are thousands of years old, but yet still make a lot of sense and still make a difference in our lives. So be with us now in your Son's name. Amen. There is a word that worries us. Because nobody likes to be ordinary. You want to stand out. If you have somehow missed the rhetoric of the ever-increasing presidential campaign, time to make America great again. Because that's who we are as Americans. We are great. You don't believe us? Just ask us. And if you don't seem to understand this, let me just raise my voice and talk a little slower, right? But we want to be great. And if we can't be great, we want to be part of some kind of connection of something that's great. And the problem is some of us are really great in certain areas. And some of us use that greatness to cover up not just the ordinary, but the not so great in our lives. And there's this great passage over in 2 Corinthians, and we've talked about it a couple of times in this series. We have this section of the Bible called 2 Corinthians. It's a letter from Paul. It is actually not the second letter he wrote to Corinthians. It's actually the fourth letter he wrote to Corinthians. But somewhere along the line, we lost number 1 and number 3, and so what we have now in our Bibles is 1 Corinthians, which is actually 2 Corinthians, and 4 Corinthians, which is actually 2 Corinthians, because it would not make sense if you opened up a book and said 2 Corinthians, 4 Corinthians, we would ask the question, where is 1 and 3, right? And since we have no idea where 1 and 3 is, we just said, hey, we're going to call number 2, number 1, number 4, number 2, because most people won't figure that out. But we somehow lost these letters, but they still give us some insights into what the other ones might have been about. But in this section of 2 Corinthians, chapter 4, we're going to look at today, Paul has gone on this long kind of thing. And these letters are long. I mean, these are like 13, 14 chapters long. And you got to remember, back when Paul wrote these things, they didn't have a little, he wasn't texting 140 some characters, right? He wasn't sitting down at his computer knocking these things out. He wasn't even sitting down and writing a letter and, putting an envelope, clicking it, mailing it off. They were writing this on the back of leaves, on the back of, animal skins and, stuff that they had begun. I mean, this was hard work. This wasn't just sit down and knock this thing out. So this was a lot of work to go through to write these letters. And so in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, the lead up to it has been this. Paul is saying, listen, folks, this whole idea of preaching, this whole idea of trying to help you understand who God is and to try to help you stay on track with him has nothing to do with us and has everything to do with him. And anytime we forget it's about him and not about us, we get into trouble. So he says, listen, we're done. We don't kind of trick people. We don't kind of, bait and switch with people. We don't distort things, even though at times it'd be easy to distort because it's kind of hard to explain some things. We just kind of put it out there straight. And he says in this process, it's because God's done something in our lives. And we've gotten this light, this language he uses, this and kind of knowledge, this kind of insight that's happened as God has kind of worked in our lives. And he says that's really the thing that God has given all of us. If we're a follower of Jesus, is he's given some light. And as that light has worked in our lives, illuminated things, we're in this process. But it's really about him and not about us. And then he makes this incredible statement in verse 7 of chapter 4. He says, we have this treasure, and the treasure he's talking about is this idea of light and knowledge, this experience with God. We have this treasure from God, but we are like clay jars that hold the treasure. And there's a couple other translations of this. New Living Translation says, but this precious treasure, this light and power that now shine within us, is held in perishable containers. Or, I love how the Message paraphrase grabs it. He says, listen, we carry this precious message around in the unordained clay pots of our ordinary lives. So, as way of illustration today, let me explain what Paul's talking about. Anybody not know what this is? This is one of the greatest inventions of last century, right? And if you were around when these first came by, you know what an incredible invention this was. It was a way to take food and store it and make it last longer than it had lasted before. It created the whole culture of what we call now leftovers. And I'm guessing a lot of you, given especially last weekend, ate some leftovers, right? Great invention, Tupperware. And so Paul says, listen, we have this treasure, this amazing gift from God, but we have it is in Tupperware. Just normal, everyday clay pots for them. It was stuff they made. It was kind of fragile. It was, if you broke it, you threw it out. Every archaeological site they go to, they find lots of little pieces of clay pots. You know why? It broke, you threw it out the window. You grabbed another one. They were just these things, these ordinary things. He says, listen, we have this unbelievable treasure of God, but it's in these very ordinary things, these fragile things. These aren't going to last forever kind of things. They aren't quite like Tupperware, because Tupperware it seems like it could last forever, right? When Jesus comes back, he's going to look at these piles of trash and then see all the plastic stuff and going to go, really? But now, you may not have the official Tupperware brand. Maybe you have something like this. My family loves Chinese food, and so we get lots of Chinese takeout. These are amazing things that are no longer in little boxes. You get the box sometimes, but now they get these things, and they're actually microwavable safe. They're, put them in the dishwasher. They're great inventions, right? But if you don't go out to eat very much, maybe you have either the butter container or some other kind of container, right? How many of you use this is your go-to Tupperware? Anyway, we have too many of these now. So my wife has gotten rid of all of these. So it used to be we used to have a bunch of these. But this is Paul's point. We have this incredible gift, and this is what we get to store it in. No matter how much, you guys took time to get ready today, and I know some of you ladies put in lots of time on a Sabbath morning. And bless you, thank you, by the way. But you get the outside, that's great, but it's still, when you get down to it, it's still a cup. By the way, if you looked at this big container and you thought, what in the world is Mike doing at his house that he needs a Tupperware that size, right? Because remember, this is containing leftovers, and if I'm not making any kind of food where this is containing leftovers. This has actually been my family's, one of the most important tools in my family. Do you know what we use this Tupperware for, the grand size one? It's when we get sick. There is nothing better than the large, extra large size Tupperware for when you get sick. You put it by your bed, you grab it up, you can hug it, because, And it's within those kinds of things that we have this incredible gift, this incredible treasure from God. And Paul's trying to make that point, and I'm trying to make it so we understand. We get to contain something incredible, but God puts it in the cheap, basic stuff when he could have been in the most beautiful thing. But that's not what he chooses. And Paul goes on and says, listen, there's a reason for this. The idea that it gets put in that, shows that this extraordinary power is from God and not us. Your life is not about you. We talked about this the first week. And I told you, I hope you do lose weight. Some of you really need to lose weight. And I hope you get your finances in state, because some of you really need to get that taken care of. Those are important things, don't get me wrong. And other things, your relationship, whatever the thing is, there's a reason we have these things called resolutions, is because we got stuff in our lives that needs to get better. And oftentimes it needs to get better fast, and that's part of our problem. But there is more to you than you. Your life is about so much more than just, losing some LBs or, getting that debt down. It is as important as those things are. And Paul says that's exactly what this is about. The reality that why God put such an incredible thing in such cheap things, such throwaway things, is so that we never forget this is not about us, it's about him. And it's this extraordinary great power. When he talks about power there, he's talking about this thing that literally can change somebody's life. And then he goes on this sort of rant that's interesting, but you got to keep it in context. Because Paul said, listen, we're nothing, God is everything. Then he begins to describe kind of how life works for us, and the reminder that God is everything, that God is this power that doesn't always get to do it and deserves in these things, but is glad to reside in these things. And he says this, he says, listen, we have troubles all around. Anybody with him today? Got troubles all around, but we are not defeated. We're not crushed. In fact, the language here is this idea that we are having the life squeezed out of us. But even in that squeezing, we're not crushed. Feels like we get close to it, but it's not all the way there. We do not know what to do. We're perplexed. We're bewildered. And some of us have been there, right? I have no clue what to do here. But I know I got to do something. But I have no idea. And he says, listen, but we do not give up the hope of living. Even though we don't know what's going on, we have this idea of hope that God knows what it is, and our job is just simply to kind of trust him and to move along with us. And we are persecuted. And the language here is not kind of persecuted as we typically think of it. It's the idea of pursued. In Paul's case, he was kind of run out of towns because of what he was sharing with people. But it kind of follows that sometimes, people pursue us. Sometimes it's stalkers, those kind of people. Sometimes it just seems like people kind of just have joy out of, doing stuff in our lives. But he says, listen, we're persecuted, but God does not leave us. We're not abandoned. Doesn't change the fact that we're pursued or persecuted or, there's this pressure, but we know that God's still there, that God is in this container. We are hurt sometimes. We're struck down sometimes. We're knocked over sometimes, but we are not destroyed. And what Paul is arguing here is about the misconception that has been around Christianity from the very beginning. And that is, if you just accept Jesus into your life, everything's going to be all right. We sing songs about it. We grab text and run with it because that's what it says. One of my favorite passages in the Bible, John chapter 10, verse 10. Jesus says, I've come to give you life and life more abundantly. Baby, sign me up for that, right? Today, tomorrow, and every day of my life, I want some abundance. Just pour it on me, right? So we say that's what it says, so that's what it's got to be. And Paul says, no, that's not quite how it's going to be. There's an abundance here, and the abundance is in the idea of the underlying, his responses here, that we're not destroyed, that we're not crushed, that we're not left abandoned. But he says all this other stuff, it happens. And that's not a sign that God isn't with us. It's just an opportunity for God to show up in those things that are happening. And then he says this incredible statement. He says, listen, we always carry the death of Jesus in our own bodies. And when he talks about the death of Jesus here, he's not simply just talking about the death of Jesus on a cross. Not just talking about Jesus dying for our sins, as huge and important as it is. He's talking about the whole life of Jesus. Because Jesus carried his death for a long time. He seemed to know it was coming. He seemed to have good days and bad days, like all of us do. He had people who didn't like him, who talked bad about him. He had people actually plotting multiple times on how to kill him. I'd ask you to raise your hand, but I don't want anybody to get in trouble today, all right? And so he says, we carry around the same kind of thing. Jesus went through this. Why would we think we're not going to go through some of this stuff? So we carry that around. But he says, we do it so that the life of Jesus, that is this resurrection life, and resurrection life is the idea that something that's dead comes back to life. Excuse me, I had to catch my breath there. Had to come back to life, right? We get to carry that idea that something can come back to life, can also be seen that is revealed in our bodies. Reality is life happens. That's what Paul's talking about. Life happens. At times we have no clue what we're doing. Sometimes we feel like just, life is closing in on us. The collection agencies are closing in on us. The landlord's closing in on us. Our boss is closing in on us. Sometimes we fall down. Sometimes we're tripped. And while life happens, so does God. And that's why he says, this is how we feel, this is what we're experiencing, but this is the reality that's behind it. Not only that, brokenness isn't an excuse. Sometimes we hear people say, that's just the way I am. What they're simply saying by that is, get over it. You got to deal with it because this is who I'm going to be. And Paul's argument is, no, you can't use brokenness as an excuse. Rather, see brokenness as an opportunity. And it's really God's opportunity. We run away from brokenness so much in life. We don't like the idea of brokenness. In fact, some of the translations about this whole clay pot thing, we use the language cracked pots. Because these pots, if they got chipped, you probably still used them for a while. As long as the crack wasn't too bad, wasn't leaking too much stuff out. It wasn't like you had lots of money to go buy something else. And while we run from brokenness, or use it as an excuse. The reality is it's an opportunity to let God come in and reside in a different way in our lives. To not let brokenness be the end of us. See, it's when our hearts are unsettled that we become most aware of what they contain. I'll let you just let that kind of soak in for just a second. Because we try to protect our hearts from everything, don't we? And the problem is if you build enough protection, enough walls, nothing can get in. And the problem with that is nothing can get in. But it's oftentimes when our hearts are unsettled, when something isn't going right, when they're agitated, when they're kind of thrown around, that we begin to discover some stuff that's in there that we really need to look at. Not only that, we need to embrace ordinary. If you're taking notes, you notice there's no place for that. That was an extra throw-in last night, so you can throw that in. That's a free bonus today. Today was free bonus day, so... And what I mean about embracing ordinary, I don't mean about embracing, okay, well, I guess my life's going to be ordinary. I'll just kind of go on with life. What I mean by embracing ordinary is what Paul kind of talks about here. And what the rest of the Bible talks about. And what we sometimes miss in modern Christianity. See, we oftentimes think that we have to be more than ordinary. We got to be somebody who goes overseas and does some kind of incredible thing. We got to be making a big difference in this world. And none of those things are bad things, don't get me wrong. But sometimes we focus so much on, I got to get there and do that we miss the ordinary, regular things that happen in life that are equally as sacred and as important before God. And I see Dennis and Brianna here. And every time they change Aaliyah's diaper, that's a pretty ordinary thing. Except on those really bad occasions when it's extraordinary. But you're right. I mean, but you can kind of go, really, I got to do this. I got more important things to do. Whatever your jobs are, I got to go. I could be out doing something. I could make money. But the reality is, when you're changing those diapers, that's an ordinary thing, but that's something to be embraced. Jesus will not use diapers. He'll just simply say, if you give a cup of cold water to somebody in my name, you've done something important. Jesus says the ordinary is just as important as the extraordinary, the big stuff. And we need more ordinary Christians. But the problem is that makes a lousy bumper sticker. Right? Because we want to be something big and incredible, and that's really doing something. And we forget that it's oftentimes the ordinary stuff that is really doing something. In your bulletin, in your program this week, there's a great page there about what some folks in our community did about going and shoveling. I know more than just a few folks. I know a lot of you went and shoveled neighbors' driveways, or you went and helped other people out. And in that very ordinary act, you did something incredible. You gave people a chance at freedom. You were a freedom fighter this week if you did that. And you didn't even know that. You just thought, well, I'm already out here shoveling. Might as well finish it up, right? Then you saw another spot to go to, and another spot to go to. And somewhere we have missed along the way, not just the value of seeing everything we do as sacred, but the radicalness of seeing the ordinary as valuable and important and sacred. See, we are called to love people radically in the context of our ordinary, everyday lives. It's one of the things I hate about mission trips. Now, I like the idea of mission trips. I think it's important for people to go help somebody. I think getting out of the country, going to some other spot, for our kids does some great stuff, so don't get me wrong on that. But the idea that we call that a mission trip And we don't call it a mission trip when we go to the grocery store. Or when we take the mail that's been delivered to our house to our neighbor because it went to the wrong one. Because we've talked about here before, and we will continue to talk about, we're all about the idea of living out the kingdom of God wherever you're at. And as Pastor Jason has talked about, we will never ask you in this church to share your faith. That's because of one simple fact. You already are. So why would I ask you to do something you're already doing? What I want you to see is the fact of what you're doing has value, has importance. It has importance to that person. It has importance to God. And to embrace the ordinary, to raise your sights, to recognize that while it may be in a nice orange Tupperware, or it might be in just a lousy little, what is this stuff? Not even cream cheese. It's cream cheese spread. It means it's not even cream cheese. But whatever kind of thing you get, that it's a reminder again, it's not about the container. It's about the gift the container has. And Paul would say, listen, it's to show that whatever power, whatever good comes out of us, not us, but it's God doing something in and through us. We said this at the start. You want to be better this year? There's a simple way to do that. And that is to do something to make someone else's life better this year. And to keep that as the goal, there's maybe your resolution this year. Focus on yourself, but don't get totally focused on yourself. Think about what you can do for some other folks. I saw this statement. This guy's some kind of author. I have no idea who he is, but I thought it was a great statement. Got to think about it for a moment, all right? Let it sink in for a second. How many of you have a major scar in your life? I got one right here. From when I was a butcher, and I cut the wrong thing. Still a dead spot. I can scratch and I don't feel some stuff off of it. But it's true, isn't it? We have, it's hard to forget pains because we have these scars that remind us of it. But we don't get scars from some sweetness thing. We don't have a way to show, a scar to show for happiness. And so it's easy to forget things we're happy for, things that are valuable. We tend to kind of remember the things that weren't so good. So to wrap this up today, I want to do something for all of us, especially for those of us that have ever been in a Christian group where the idea of being perfect before God was the most important thing. Where the idea is that you'll never be good enough, but too bad. You got to keep trying to be good, and you got to keep trying this and stopping that, stopping this, knocking that off. If you've ever been part of a group that has ever told you that you can't really know that not only are you loved by God, but you're accepted by God. So we're going to go to 1 John chapter 1, right at the beginning. John writes, listen, actually that's not the right passage. It's in 1 John, but that's not the right passage. So somebody will correct me later. I appreciate that. It's not the first time. Won't be the last time. But trust me, it is in 1 John, all right? Right, Nathan? 1 John? Yeah, see, I got a witness. We're all good. Okay, here. Listen. John writes, and John's an old guy at this point, and he's writing to all these people that over his life he has poured his life into. And he's this old pastor, and he's kind of saying, listen, to all of you who are going to read this letter, it's all over the place of that area of Turkey and the Middle East there. He says, listen, the Father has loved us so much, that we are called children of God. Then he throws in this great line. Because he knows when we read that first line, we're going to go, yeah, but I thought this. And John says, no. We really are. We really are his children. I want you to say that with me. We really are. I said that with a lot of energy. I don't have to come back to you. That's good. Because that's important, isn't it? Dear friends, Now, present case, at this moment, now we are the children of God. And we have not yet been shown what we will be in the future. We're back to that, we have no clue. But John says that's not a big deal. We don't know what it is, but that doesn't matter because now we are his children. And those of you that are parents know this really well. You have children, and at this moment they are your children. Little bitty babies, bigger babies. Some of you got some really big babies out there, right? And you don't have a clue of what they're going to be in the future, right? They got plans, they're going to be this, they're going to be that. You have no idea yet until they get to where they're going to go. But he says that doesn't change the fact that any of those points that they, or at that moment, they are your children, right? They will always be your children. But we know that when Christ comes again, we will be like him. John simply says, listen, folks, the thing we all need to know is that we are God's children. We really are. And now, we are. We don't know what that's going to mean in the future. But we do know that when Jesus returns, that we're going to be like him somehow, and I don't know how that works in these sort of perishable, throwaway containers. But it's going to happen. And here's the point I want to leave you with today. God doesn't love you because you're perfect. Got to point the right way. He loves you because you are his child. And for some of you, that's the thing you need to know, not just today, but this next week and this next few months. Because there will be things in your life, people in your life, people are always good about this, to point out all the stuff that you aren't. And according to God, they're correct. But it doesn't make any difference because you're his child.